So, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming along to the Beef and Lamb Strategy Town Hall discussion. We're in for about an hour and a half here at the moment, but what we're going to try and do is run through a little presentation to start with, but spend most of the time tonight trying to answer as many questions as we possibly can do. So what I'm going to do for a start is just introduce everybody, run through the way that the system that we're on tonight works, and then we'll jump into a little bit of a presentation. So just to introduce everybody who we have here tonight, and you probably will know most people, but I'm Will Jackson and I'm Chief Strategy Officer at AHDB. Up until about 6 months ago, I did look after Beef and Lamb as well. Also on the call, we've got Rebecca Miah, who is the Strategy Sector Director for Beef and Lamb, and we've got Adam Quinney, who is the Chair of the Beef and Lamb Sector Board. And just to say in the background as well, we've got Nicholas Sapphire, who is the AHDB Chair, in the background on the call as well today. So that's who everybody is today. And what I just wanted to start by doing was running through basically how all this works and what to expect from the next hour or so. And just point out for a start that this session's been recorded. So we're going to record everything that's said tonight and everything that comes up in the chat as well. And that will be put on the AHDB website and pushed out over social media over the next few days. So it will give anybody who didn't get the opportunity to come along tonight to go back and have a bit of a look at what was said and what happened. So one of the key things about the platform that we're using tonight is that it's completely transparent. So anything that you either type in or anything that is said or anybody who comes onto the screen, that will be recorded and everybody who is on the call can see everything that's said. So there are two ways that you can get involved tonight. The first way is by, on the right hand of your screen, you've got a chat box. It says start typing in the bottom corner. If you go in there at any point and type a message in, it will appear in the chat. So as we're going through, if anybody's got any questions or comments or anything that they want a clarification on, please drop it in that chat box, and we'll either get to it from ourselves on here, or if it's a technical question, one of the team in the background will get back to you on it. The other way that you can ask questions is by requesting to come up and be on the screen with us. So there's a little button in the top right hand corner above the presentation that says share audio and visual. So if you click on that, a little notification comes up at the bottom part of my screen, and then I can bring you onto the screen so you can either ask your question or, as I say, get a clarification or whatever it might be. I'll run through this again when we get to the question and answer stage of it. So we've got one of the key things, and I talked a bit about the transparency of this platform earlier on, is that we won't be responding to any direct messages tonight. So everything that is discussed will be on either the main chat or people through there. So there won't be any response to direct messages. And the last thing is that there's a slight delay between things on here. So just bear with us. As I move on a slide on the presentation or switch to a video, there's a few second delay. So just please bear with us with that. Yeah, Melanie's just asked in the chat, will the recording be available? Yes, it will be available to view afterwards, and anybody else can log in. There'll be a link put on the website, so that will be available for anybody who wants to go and do so. Okay, so just moving into the main part of tonight. As I said, what we're going to do is going to try and divide this into two sections. A short presentation to start with to give you a bit of an overview about where the AHDB strategy is. And so I'll talk a little bit about the overall AHDB strategy, and then I'm going to hand over to Adam and Rebecca, who are going to talk in a little bit more detail about what that means from a beef and lamb point of view. And then after that, when we've got through, we'll address any questions. So please feel free to ask questions as we're going on, because it gives us a good chunk to be getting into once we get into the question and answers. We have had some pre-submitted questions, which I have here, so we'll try and get through as many pre-submitted questions and as many that we're doing on the day. Just one other thing that I'm just going to mention before we get into it is about feedback, and I'm going to talk about this at the end. But what we're presenting to you tonight is a draft strategy. So this is not a final finished version. At the moment, this is our first draft of it, and we're really keen for people to give feedback on where we're up to at the moment. So I'm going to put the links up at the end of it, but what I want to make really clear is that this is a genuine consultation on this strategy. So any feedback that we get will be taken into account, will be considered. So I don't want people to think that any feedback's either going to go in a black hole or not get looked at. All the feedback that we get, and we're keen to get as much as we possibly can do, will help us shape this and shape how we put this strategy into practice. So I'll revisit that at the end, and I'll share the links with everybody about where you can go to give feedback and where to go what's on the AHDB website. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly jump into the presentation now. So the strategy document that's available on the website at the moment, and if anybody wants any more information on the areas that we're discussing tonight, if you go to the AHDB website and you click on the main page, there's a tile on there that takes you straight through to all the strategy document and gives you a little bit more information on everything that we're going to talk about. Now, there are two elements to the overall strategy at AHDB. We've got a change section, and then we've got the strategic direction. So I'm just going to pick 2 or 3 things out of the change side of things to talk about initially. So the 3 things that you can see up on the screen, the first one of which is about cost savings, and it's something that we get talked to an awful lot about, and through the Beef and Lamb Spec, so we're always asked about where we are with costs. Are we being as effective and efficient as we possibly can be? Well, as part of this new strategy, there has been an absolute focus on cost savings and how we deliver those. So looking at how we can do that from a staff point of view, but also how we do it with our current workload point of view. So this will probably come in phases. So there will be a first phase of cost savings, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on when we get to talking about the way that the budget's broken down. But there will be definite savings across the support and staff costs within AHDB. The next one's about the modern levy collection system. So we collect levies across 6 sectors at AHDB, and each one are done in a slightly different way as it is at the moment. And what we're looking to do as part of the transparency and part of increasing engagement with levy payers is making sure that the levy system is completely appropriate and modern in each of those sectors. And one way that we're looking at this, and you'll have seen if you've had a chance to look at the strategy document, we've talked about zero-based budgeting in there. And what that means, and what a lot of what we're trying to achieve at the moment is making sure that levy payers have the absolute say in where that money is spent. So I think there's two important things to draw out at this stage is that the beef and lamb sector and how the beef and lamb sector will be very key, how they link in to AHDB, how that engagement works, and then the levy will be set based on what work wants to be undertaken for the beef and lamb sector. So that will be, so depending on what outcomes are required, and this is going to be a really important change in what we're doing, and we'll probably get a chance to talk about levy payer engagement later on, but getting that 2-way conversation with levy payers and really being clear on what the delivery needs to be for the beef and lamb sector will then dictate what level the levy is set at. I guess the last thing just to quickly touch on here is around the 5-year ballot. So you will have seen quite a lot about this in the press over the last little while. There is going to be a 5-year ballot on AHDB. We are currently in discussions with DEFRA, and they are looking at actually how that will practically work. So it's DEFRA and the devolved governments, and they're just looking at in a practical way how that will be put into place. You'll probably be aware at the moment that we've got ballots going on in horticulture and potatoes. Well, the one that we're talking about here is over all the sectors across AHDB. So when we get an idea about how that's practically going to work and when it will be in place, then we'll give you a little bit more information. And I guess the other thing just to cover off in this area is around governance. And again, something that we've had a few questions on in the past is how we're set up from a governance point of view. Well, there has been an awful lot of work done over the last few months in terms of governance. There has been an independent committee set up that has been advised by an independent governance expert consultancy business, and we are currently working through the latter stages of what that is going to mean for the governance across the organisation. But one of the key things, I'll come back to it again, is about the transparency and how everybody is absolutely aware about how the governance works, about how the organisation operates. And we're going to be very, very open about this, probably as open as we've ever been about everything. There will be a bit more information to come on governance before too long. So as soon as we get the ability to be able to talk a bit more about that, we will do. And I'm just very, very quickly going to just talk through the 3 main areas that we have in the strategy, and I'll hand over to Adam, who's going to talk about the beef and lamb specifics. So we've broken the strategy down into 3 main areas of work. The top one on this it talks about performance and profitability. that is based around what we're calling farm performance. So there's a huge amount of work that we already do on farm performance. We're really looking at making sure that that is absolutely relevant. Again, each sector is slightly different, so making sure it really delivers for the sector. So whether that's looking at environmental measuring and research around the environmental and sustainability area, whether that's about on-farm work, there is a huge amount that's coming into that, and some new projects that we're looking to bring on that you'll hear a bit more about, and you may have picked up reading into the document about Farm 360 and one or two other elements. So that's really making sure we're focused on the areas that are going to make the biggest difference. And Adam will talk about that from a beef and lamb point of view in a second. Really important area, and I know how close it is to the hearts of beef and lamb producers, is about flying the flag. So that's our exports and marketing. So talking about our domestic marketing, so what we're doing in this market at home, also what we're doing abroad. So where we've got market access and where we're working promotion in other countries. So a real big focus on that area. And then the last area is about evidence and data. So that is making sure that all the work that we do within AHDB, whether it's looking at which markets we want to go into next and open up, whether it's looking at actually what we need to do from an environmental point of view, but also then helping the industry with any needs that they might have, is based in evidence and data. Data's taking up a huge part of what we do as an industry now, and it's becoming more and more integral in what we're doing. So how can we harness that in the best way? How can we as AHDB, as that independent body in the middle, give that trustworthy centre point for data, but also then really be steeped in evidence and make sure everything that we are driving is coming from an evidence point of view. And that's whether we're helping external organisations or any of the work that we're doing. Evidence is going to be absolutely at the heart of everything we do. So that's a bit of an overall side of things. So I'm just going to hand over to Adam now, who's going to talk a little bit more about beef and lamb.
Thanks, Will.
Sorry, I just need to move the slide on.
Move the slide on.
There we go.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So I'm going to give a quick run over some of the work we've been doing, but also some of the details of a new strategy, and then Rebecca will take on more detail on that. So I think it's also just picking up some of Will's points there. We've also been, over the last few years, we have been looking at cost savings year on year, every year, about the agencies we use, the staff numbers and everything else. It hasn't just been now we're looking at cost saving. And so in the last 2-3 years, over the whole sort of sector, we've been looking at sort of nearly £1 million worth of savings from sort of getting rid of agencies, better tendering, and so on, and also stopping doing some of the work that actually had very little impact, but it was £20,000 there, £30,000 there, and sponsorship of various things, and added up to quite a bit of money. When we looked at it and said, how is this actually returning the return on the investment the levy payers are making? And if it wasn't a positive return, we stopped doing it. And that caused a bit of upset, but it was the right thing to do. Okay, so a quick glance. We've been working on new export markets now for several years, both in Japan, China, the US. In China, we have a full-time person who works with other government agencies out there. This has been a long process over a number of years. We have lots of inward missions from vets, from Chinese vets over here. About 2 years ago, we had the questionnaire from China. The questionnaire weighed 6 kilograms worth of paperwork, which we went through, and Phil Hadley and his team dealt with. It's a real step in the right direction to get beef exports open up to China. These things do not happen overnight. Japan was through a European agreement, and that's been rolled on with good work by government on that to make sure we can carry on exporting to Japan. Again, that's a high value market. Grass beef is quite new to them. They're really into their American cereal finished beef, but we think there's opportunities there because they value food tremendously. And to give you an idea, people go out to dinner and they'll take a punnet of strawberries individually wrapped, and for about $20 a strawberry. And this is quite high value markets, that's why we've aimed for. US, we've had agreement with the US for quite a while, but actually getting it done is taking time and getting equivalents on testing and so on, because we wanted to make sure we can get manufacturing beef in there. The US is actually one of the world's biggest importers of beef, and it's mostly manufacturing beef because their cattle are so fat, they want some manufacturing beef. And that's why we took longer than some other countries to make sure we could get our manufacturing beef into there. Now, we've been working on with all the key stakeholder organizations from the farmer side and also on the processor side to work about what is going to be our focus in the years to come. And everybody said that reputation with our consumers, whether they're here or abroad, was key. Reputation, putting the record straight at times about carbon footprints, about how we handle stock, how we manage stock, so people could go and buy our beef and lamb with confidence, knowing that our welfare, our environmental credentials were not only good, but we could also demonstrate it as well. And we'll talk more about that later. Part of our, so those two areas actually take up the biggest chunk of our focus. The marketing and exports and our promotion at home, that is the biggest chunk of our focus and spend. But we also do work on the strategic farms. If you look around the mapping on the website, there's about 16 strategic beef and lamb farms around the country where we like to develop ideas, and farmers can learn from each other. Everybody can learn from each other, but especially now, with the focus is going to be about how does this fit into our reputation. So our knowledge exchange work is going to focus in areas that others cannot go, because it's not about necessarily individual advice, but it's about industry advice and taking the industry forward as one, where it's about antimicrobial use, i.e. medicines, or whether it's about how we grow grasses and demonstrate that we're sequestering more and more carbon into the ground, and so on. We can't just talk about these things, we have to be able to demonstrate that we're actually doing to our consumers. So on the R&D side, the primary focus is going to be on genetics and and how that links into the environment. All these things have to have a thread that goes through them all that fits into our reputation. And I think that's really important, that you know that the work we're doing out on farm or in our R&D is to support the work we do for our reputation for the industry. And that's been made very clear to our R&D teams, which we've reduced R&D over the last few years. But what we want to do is, if our reputational work shows that we need to do some work with R&D in a particular area to reinforce that reputation of our beef and sheep industry, such as how we manage grasslands, how we sequester carbon, how we handle wastes and so on, then that's where the R&D will go. The projects we've got running at the moment, such as the RAM Compare and so on, they will continue because they actually enhance the environment. The feed trials we do, again, looking for genetics that show a 20% difference in intake of animals with the same performance. Again, it's about how do we use the capital resources of this land in the most efficient way to reduce our carbon footprint. That's a quick sort of overview. I'll hand on to Rebecca now to go through the strategy.
Okay, so obviously, as Adam was saying, we were talking about reputation, and reputation is that single thread that runs through everything. And for that, what we need is the on-farm work to be able to support the consumer work that we're doing. We know from an awful lot of research, and I've been involved in this from the very beginning of moving over to reputation work for red meat and dairy. We know an awful lot about our consumers and how they consume our product and how they think and feel about some of the negative noise that's going on. But firstly, I want to reassure that actually we know the majority of consumers, so you've got 90% penetration in beef, 47% of households still buying lamb, that they actually really love the taste of beef and lamb, the nutritional values, all of the good things that it brings to them. But there is that negative noise out there, and there is rising concern. So it became clear that actually what we need to do is give consumers permission to enjoy what they want to enjoy. They want to continue purchasing. They see the value in both farming, the food systems, and the product on their plates, but actually they're feeling just slightly uncomfortable from that negative noise. And what we need to do is give them the permission to enjoy what they want to buy. So the piece of work that we've started, Eat Balanced, is all about giving that permission. It's about changing that conversation and re-owning our own reputation. It's not about defense, because actually you don't need to be defensive. We have a really good story to tell, and it's an important part of a healthy, sustainable diet and a cyclical farming system. So Eat Balanced is the very first start of a piece of work that will run over the next 5 years, re-owning that reputation of red meat and dairy. It's all evidence-based. So as I say, there's been an awful lot of knowledge into who our consumers are, the ones that are wavering and open to that negative messaging. And I do mean not just age and household kind of demographics, but actually really indeed of what do they buy, where do they buy it, how do they eat it, how are they cooking it, what are they watching on TV while they are actually eating it. a really in-depth knowledge so that we can target this as perfectly as possible. And when we've been putting the campaign together, we've been testing each and every message that we go out with, from both the very, very bold to the very, very passive. And what we've come to a point of is actually 3 main evidence-based messages, which are backed up by stories and information around farming and food, nutrition and environment and welfare. Those 3 key messages, the first one is a source of B12, which is not naturally present in a vegan diet. B12 is a really core message for us. People are interested in the nutritional values and making sure they get that balanced diet, and it resonated really highly. Secondly, that British beef and lamb is among the most sustainable in the world. We have already made great tracks in actually ensuring that we are a sustainable farming industry. We need to do more and continue that piece of work, but actually that's a really key message that we can hold above and beyond. And it's produced to world-class food and farming standards. They need to feel reassured that actually welfare and all of those pieces of activity are covered. And the ultimate aim of this is to make them feel comfortable that actually they don't need to be concerned about this in the future, because the industry itself is looking after the impacts that we make. We've got these identified consumer groups and we're targeting the media really specifically at them. This first launch is a TV campaign which launched on the 4th of January and has been going really, really well. There is video on demand, so this is kind of catch-up TV, so your Sky Go and your ITV on demand, where you run the adverts before and after programming. Social media obviously is incredibly important for us, and that's across all different platforms. We're also going to kind of the main ground of where this debate is being had. We've taken out full-page adverts in the Guardian newspaper. We're right in the thick of this debate and not shying away from the fact, actually, we have a part in this debate and we have a really good story to tell. And we're also getting really great traction with the retailers as well. Sainsbury's have already got fins up, which are basically kind of big banners on all of their shelves. We're getting great traction with the rest of the retailers and online in those retail environments as well. But as I say, this is the very beginning of this. It's a long scale piece of work. It won't always be great big campaigns. A lot of this is about just continuing to have that conversation. We have a panel of GPs, nutritionists, environmentalists that can carry our stories on an independent basis as well. The industry has really got behind this. I'm incredibly proud, actually, of the farmers telling their stories, of the industry members getting involved and supporting this. And that's really important. We're not in this in a vacuum. This isn't AHDB's job to do alone. And that has really come forth, that everybody has got behind it. And now, after that quick run through, I will allow Will to let you run the video. If it works, this is always the question.
Yeah, of course it will, of course it will. If you just drop on mute, Rebecca, we'll get it on. So that's the so as Rebecca says, that's the advert that's out there at the moment, and it's all over the place. So I've seen it on prime time a few times over the last few days. I would just point out that the finish to that one was a lamb tray bake. However, there is a steak sandwich version as well. So there's a beef and a lamb version. There's also a pork version as well. As I think it's probably key to say that in this campaign as well, we've drawn together 3 areas to really make sure that we're hitting as bigger impacts as we possibly can do. So while the reputation is really important to us in the beef and lamb sector, actually it spreads further than that. And where we can do work across others, it's really pertinent if we can do. Right, so just to finish off, I'm just going to drop on, just do 2 really quick things and talk through about where we are and what we're doing at the moment from a budgetary point of view, and then where the focus is going to be over the next few years. So the first chart that you can see on the screen at the moment is one that's available on the website, so you can go and have a look on the AHDB website, and there's breakdowns of everything, and that just gives a little bit of a top line view about where the money is spent in this financial year. So as you can see, it's broken down into all the different elements that we have at the moment, from knowledge exchange through to marketing, exports, and all the different areas. I guess one of the big pullouts from this slide that I want people to kind of take away is, well, there are two things actually. Just first looking at the number in the middle, you'll see that it's there's £19.5 million of expenditure in there, which is actually more than we have, more than we receive in levy income. The reason that number is a little bit higher is that we also derive an income from several places. So whether that be looking at selling doing deals on some of the market intelligence stuff that we do, or whether it's looking at some of the work that we've done around the EU land campaign, where we've had money that's come in to be then spent on specific marketing areas. So we do try and generate income where we can do. And I think it's probably quite an important point to draw back to the main strategy, that partnerships and working with other organisations, whether they be commercial, whether they be other industry organisations, is something that we're really, really focusing on and saying, can we drive some more value? So it's not necessarily just about getting more money out of other organisations, it's can we improve our delivery by working tighter with other organisations. So that partnerships and engaging with industry is going to be absolutely vital for us. As you can see from the split, you know, the vast majority of the work that we do at the moment, and I think that if you tot it all up, it's about 57% at the moment we spend of the beef and lamb levy is spent on promotion at home and abroad. So that's everything from domestic marketing through to exports, market access, and everything else that Adam was just talking about. There is an argument that you could actually go a little bit higher, given that some of the market intelligence work that's done is about identifying new markets. So there are actually bits that are done that feed into that. And we talk about the fact that that reputation is absolutely vital. Well, being able to get the reputation and what we do and how we're able to represent things on farm through into that final messaging is also important. So all of this comes together to create that full picture. The one bit I just wanted to point out was in the top corner, which is the support section of it. So I talked earlier on a little bit about our cost savings, and Adam's absolutely right. We have always been trying to make sure we're keeping an eye on reducing costs. It's just something that we want to make sure that we've got a real focus on in this new strategy. So we'll be looking to shrink that 10% over this next while. And when we talk about support costs, there are a couple of elements to it. So there's the elements that sit across everything. So things like levy collection, which is a function that we require as an organisation, and is then divided down between the different sectors depending on how much work is done. And there are other things in there like our IT solutions and the building that we have and various other things like that. But there are also some sector-specific ones in there. So there'll be people like Rebecca, and Rebecca will fall into that support section in there. So what we're going to be looking to do is trying to be, again, a bit more transparent. So we're looking to draw those costs out and be able to apportion them to the appropriate place. So while we're looking to shrink that support cost element of it, we'll also be looking to be more transparent in how we're sending that out. So the last slide I'm just going to show you is the one that we've got on the website at the moment in terms of the focus areas for the next few years. And I think this is quite an important slide. So this is probably a simplified version of the previous graph, and that is led by the fact that we're trying to make sure that we've been really, really focused as an organisation where we can drive delivery. So we are very clear that when we're talking about either marketing and exports or farm performance, that we have to deliver what is going to provide value back to farmers. And Adam's touched on some of the things in both of those areas a few minutes ago. We will be doing the things that are going to deliver the most value back, and we are not going to be doing the things that don't. So that might mean that we've got to make some fairly tough decisions over this next little while about things that we're not going to do. And that will be part of the cost element as well, is what things do we not do versus which ones we do and we really focus on. So I just wanted to put this up because this gives you an idea about where our focus is. And from a lot of conversations I have, you know, the split that we're talking about and the feedback we got from requests for views also reflects this, that marketing and exports is very, very important to this sector. So I just wanted to highlight on there that will remain a real focus in the work that we're doing. But I will come back to what I was just saying before, that can't be it and it alone. It has to be supported by the other activity that we do. So the evidence, making sure the right things are in place in terms of which markets are we going to go into, how are we going to display back to consumers in the best possible way. And Rebecca touched on one or two of the people who are involved in that decision-making process as well. And the farm performance element of it, absolutely vital. We talk about reputation. Reputation, we think, falls into 3 buckets: human health, environment, and animal welfare. That environment aspect we all know is very, very important, and we have to be able to demonstrate on farm that we are doing, that we are absolutely on the button and we're putting our best foot forward to be able to inform the campaigns that we've got coming from a marketing export point of view. But I just wanted to put that up to give you a bit of an impression about where we're headed in terms of focus. So that is not about money at the moment, it's about focus. And when we get a finalised strategy, that's when we'll put all the pieces into place to be able to deliver the value that we want back to money payers. So that is it now from my point of view in terms of that, in terms of the presentation. So I'm going to drop that off the screen for now. We can go back to any of that if anybody wants to ask any questions. So what I'm just going to do very quickly now is revisit how you ask questions in this. And I've seen there's been a whole load of questions come in already in the chat, which is fantastic, and we'll start to get to some of those soon. So if you want to ask any questions today, you can either type down in that bottom corner where it says start typing, and that will display to everybody. The other thing that you can do if you want to ask a question or make a point at any time is in the top right hand corner of where the presentation has been, there is a box that says share audio and visual. If you click on that box, a little notification comes up at the bottom of my screen, and then I will click on that and you will appear on the screen, and then you can either ask your question or get your clarification or whatever it might be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably start with a question from the pre-sent in questions, and then we'll get to some of the ones that are in the room tonight. So we've had about 7 or 8 questions that have been sent in beforehand, and I think that if it's all right, we'll start with one that was from Mark Exelby. And I'll probably come to Rebecca first and then Adam with this. And then, so the question is around, will the future emphasis be on helping farmers gain knowledge and running valuable programs such as Rank Compare, or will it be more on advertising to stimulate demand? And I guess that kind of builds on what we were just saying a little bit. So Rebecca, do you just want to start off with that one?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And the question is both, because if we don't do both, we can't do one or the other. So with the reputation consumer work, having had that background, I know that you're only able to do that work if actually your farm performance is backing up what you are saying. So it is important, for example, through the environmental work, through the welfare work, through the nutritional understanding that we've got, that all of those boxes are checked, and we're making this continual improvement on farm to be able to drive that reputational work among consumers. In terms of stimulating demand, really, the work that we need to do actually is about changing attitudes. So previously, it has been kind of about promoting a particular cut and measuring that piece of work, but actually, your main crisis point and where AHDB as a central function sits is creating a positive trading environment. So it's making sure that consumers have the positive attitudes and behaviours that they need to be able to want to continue purchasing beef and lamb and continuing kind of increasing their repertoire of that. And by doing that piece of work, you then, as I say, need to focus on that farm performance as well. And all those different programs among environment, genetics, farm profitability and productivity to be able to service that demand and also keep that reputation strong, because you can only make those reputation statements if they are true as a marketeer. So it is, the answer to that is definitely a combination of both. And I'll hand over to Adam to give a little bit more detail about where he sees those kind of major national programs going on.
Okay, we've got Rank Compare, obviously was suspended this year. It's not finished, it's been suspended, and COVID also didn't help collecting the data. This has been a highly valuable program to recalibrate the EBVs in the sheep worlds across breeds, so each breed can compare to another. And I think it's also been a great vehicle to demonstrate how effective EBVs are. There's always been a doubt in some people's minds, do EBVs work? And taking, for those who don't know, it's about taking tups from basically using AI and using the same tup across numerous farms at the same time, across different ewes, and comparing also on-farm tups. A lot of work by those farmers who took part, and comparing everything from lambing ease to growth rates to performance on the hook and days to that kill weight. And it's demonstrated very clearly that EBVs work, that you can see you can have confidence in those EBVs. And of course, the more people who do record through Signet, the more it strengthens those EBVs. So yes, there's a huge support for RAM Compare. And I hope that when we get back to normality about people to go out on farms and so on, that we can restart that next year, because it also feeds into our reputation that the better the animals form through genetic improvement, that lowers our carbon footprint, and therefore it also fits in with our reputation as well.
It might be just worth just in terms of building on that, thinking. So we've got this this concentration on genetics, but also there are a couple of other areas that we're looking to focus on from a farm performance point of view, aren't there? In terms of grassland, and so do you just want to pick that up as well? Yeah.
So there's going to be, I say, focus on grassland is going to be one of our key areas, because it's everything we do, whether you're up in the mountains or whether in the lowlands. It's how we get our grass to perform to its best, either through mob grazing. But I think what's quite important here is we look at different circumstances, because it's all very well. I know for my own farm, some places we can do mob grazing, some places it's set stocking on rented keep and so on. So we have to be able to say, actually, if you want to keep the carbon in the soil and grow more grass that's nutritious and animal performance, this is the way to do it. And you may say, well, that's teaching me to suck eggs. But I can tell you there's always new techniques around the corner about we've got virtual fencing around the corner coming up. So perhaps those moors will be able to be grazed using virtual fencing of cattle in the future. So it is about demonstrating again and again and again that we can do everything we say we are doing, which is locking up carbon in the soils, growing cattle healthily on grass, because we're really going to have to focus on a grass-based industry, because that is what our consumer wants to see from us predominantly.
And I think that kind of, so there's a couple of questions that we've just had through the chat that kind of talk about this farm performance area. So we've got James Fanshaw's asked a pretty good straight question here, which is knowledge exchange at 7% and market analysis at 6%. Why bother? Well, I hope, James, that's probably giving you some of the answer there, is that all these are important pieces to be able to make sure that we've got that entire offer. And any one as its individual doesn't actually do the trick. Everything needs to be linked together. Now, Rob Drysdale's asked a kind of a follow-on question from that. With farm performance being smaller percentages than marketing and export development, with 75% of beef and lamb producers effectively 100% reliant on BPS, surely driving cost of production and farmer profitability for future production should be more important now after Brexit. After the Brexit deal secured exports, without producers in 5 years' time, there will be very little to sell. So I got Rob's question there is about that balance between how much we do on farm performance and how much we do on marketing. And I think that, and Adam, you feel free to come in a second, but the bit that I was just going to add at the beginning of this is we have to be very, and what you've done there is probably a good example of this, Robbie, sort of talking about evidence. So where is the evidence lying? Where can we have the biggest impact? Because I think this is, and this is always a bit of a tricky conversation to have in a lot of ways, because sometimes the thing that may seem to have the biggest impact doesn't always work that way. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as a beef and lamb sector, we've moved away from product promotion away towards attitudinal change. Because as so previously we've done campaigns around thin cut steaks. We did a very specific campaign around lamb hits you in the chops, which was based around a very specific time period with Brexit. But that was about shifting quantities of meat. And realistically, in the long term, that has very, very little impact at farm gate. So that's why we've shifted towards attitudinal change in terms of the way that we're looking at our marketing at the moment. But this is going to be a really important debate to have over this next period. I said at the beginning that we're going to be looking to engage with industry and make sure we are driving what the needs of the industry are and what can deliver best back to levy payers. And this conversation about how much is done on farm performance and how much we are looking at driving that productivity, because and we have some fantastic beef and sheep farmers, but there is still quite a proportion who can improve the position they're in. How much do we have on that versus how much do we do for the overall? And it's a balance and a conversation we need to have. Go on, Adam.
And I think also that we are looking for partners within the knowledge exchange work as on farm. So yes, while that percentage you may say is small, Rob, of our total, and I agree with your comments, that people are heavily dependent on the single farm payments. And when you see it basically halving for the majority of people and 70% for larger farms in the next 2 to 4 years, this is a major concern. But I also think it's important that we get as much value as possible for people to work with. And we are in discussions with obviously with government, because there's talking about support of that. So we're saying, well, could we deliver that? And I think it's also important that this is why the strategic farms we're looking to expand and extend. And we're also finding new ways of communicating with farmers. And COVID has pushed it hard, but we were doing it anyway. And we can deliver actually a lot of knowledge exchange, as we are tonight, down the telephone wire. That actually, I think, is a really good way of doing it. We have to pitch knowledge exchange in multiple ways. Some people want some really high-tech, brain-hurting knowledge, especially some of the cattle finishers want a real high level. Other people say, actually, the beef and sheep is not the major part of my business. I might be a cereal farmer. I just want the basics of what I should be doing here. And we have to make sure that we are delivering that knowledge exchange in formats people want. Some people want it on paper, so we need to make sure you can get it on paper if you wish, or most people now are more and more happy with having it electronically. But I think you'll see more virtual farm walks. The guy that's growing lucerne or red clover that's too far to go and visit, yeah, I'd like to go on that farm walk. And I was on a farm walk recently with my local NFU group, where we're actually walking around a farm in America. So I think there are many ways we can do this to get knowledge out without necessarily having on-farm events are quite expensive. So I think we can spend that money wisely to get the information to you at the time of day that you wish to do, or when you've had that idea and you want to investigate it. So the website is improving all the time, and that will continue to be able to get that information that you need. But you're quite right, Rob. There's a lot of things in our hands we can do on farm that will improve our productivity and efficiency. And we should be doing that whether cattle prices are good or bad, or sheep prices are good or bad, and that work will continue. Win partnership with others.
And you're dead right, Adam. We've seen over this last 12 months, especially. Well, I mean, we've made so much progress in terms of technology and everything over this period, and we've seen a real big uptick in the amount of people who we've had on our webinars, the people who've been involved, and lots of people who've never ever be engaged with AHD before, who haven't been to our physical on-farm events. And so that's really good news for us. And when we get out the other side of COVID, whenever that is, we've got to get that. We've got to make sure we keep that balance right. There is a time absolutely for face-to-face, and the strategic farms are a real key element of what we're doing from a knowledge exchange point of view. But we have to retain this digital element to it as well. So I'm just going to, and I'll say that Tony Good just put his hand up, so I will come to you, Tony, for a question shortly. I just wanted, and it kind of sits on this theme a little bit, something we just touched on here, Adam. Kevin's asked is, what do AHDB feel the key factors affecting farm performance in the next 5 years will be? And so I guess there's one thing on farm performance, but I think that one of the huge overall factors that's going to affect farms in general is what we just touched on, which is the changes that we're going to see, that Rob's alluded to BPS and to the way that support is paid to farms. And that is going to be a huge change across the industry, which we as AHDB need to play a part in helping people through. Yeah. But the industry we're going to have to take on board, because we are going to lose a huge amount. But in terms of farm performance, Adam, the key factors.
Well, I think, as we all know, most things that were killing our business is not necessarily is the variable cost, but it's our overheads of our business and how we manage output to cover our overheads and make a profit. And when we talk about productivity, we don't mean actually producing more. We mean actually how can you increase your margin and the return of your investment you're making. So we're developing there was farm bench, but the farm bench was actually quite complex and quite difficult, and you had to sit down for a few hours to do it. So we're developing a much lighter version of the key performance indicators for your farm, and these are actually working out quite rapidly what your key performance indicators are on your farm, and benchmark against others can give you a real focus on what your farm needs to do, because we're all good at something and we're all bad at things as well. And it's identifying, I might be good on my fertility, on my cattle, on my sheep, but I might not be very good at finishing or hitting market weights. And here's the price difference if you get it right. It's not, I think, to be honest with you, Will, for most farms, there's no one single silver bullet.
I'd agree.
It's going to be about a multiple of things, looking at overheads. It's about an application of technology and knowledge. It's about making sure you're producing animals to the right market spec. And that doesn't mean all cattle are going to be E4Ls. It means, what does your market require? So if, Holsteins can if it O plus, 3H for the mincing market, ideal, long as it's the right weights and so on. So let's not get too hung up on shape, but actually saying, what does my consumer, my customer actually want for that carcass size and so on. It is making sure that you're not producing, cattle that are overweight because of the penalties and so on. And that's typically suck eggs. That's why the market intelligence and so on, and where the future market demand is going, and this is why we do that research, is so we can give clear indicators to farmers. Actually, over the next 4 or 5 years, this is where the consumer market's going on cuts and various other things. So therefore, this is the type of product you should be producing. So over the next few years, you can change gently rather than having to make rapid changes to your business. But simply saying understanding your business is a bit sort of it's a bit sort of old, tired these days. And this is where I think the strategic farms can come in, where you can get inspiration from other people, how they've tackled similar problems to what you've got on your farm without necessarily spending a huge amount of money. And someone mentioned this thing there about elms. Elms also is going to have productivity grants. So we're working with DEFRA about, what actually works out on farm. So help farmers to invest on their farms that's appropriate in the right sort of product. And the sheep world is actually probably going to struggle there, because let's face it, once you've got your quad bike and your dog and a good wrapper system for your electric fences, where do you go there? So that, again, making sure that DEFRA understand about how there's a huge difference in capital spend and investment compared to the cattle industry, compared to the sheep industry. And so while we're not doing trials on elms for DEFRA, we're certainly putting our inputting of knowledge about what would be the impact if you were to do X, Y, and Z on farm. And we're improving our relationship with DEFRA and the people behind those elms teams and future strategy for support. Because in actual fact, there's a lot of people use their single farm payments to do the improvements on farm. So how can we get that diverted via elms to improve your genetics, improve your infrastructure on your farm, tracks and so on, and water supplies and so on, that improves your productivity on that farm? And there's a whole range of things, but I think anybody who thinks there's one silver bullet that's going to cure productivity out on the farm, I think is mistaken. It's going to be a multitude of things. And we're going to have to work in partnership with others to be able to deliver that, both on farm and also in how we as an organisation deliver. And what we've been concerned about in our knowledge exchange programme is if we try and be too broad and trying to deliver everything, we won't be known for specific things. So there's some really good people delivering knowledge exchange out there, from your vet to your accountant. And I think it's important we work with those people rather than necessarily trying to elbow them out the way. And there's things, but I think there's things where there's a shortage of good knowledge exchange work around, such as grassland and such as genetics. The genetics is I call it the land drainage of the arable world. You get it right and it's always there and you always progress. And that's why the Livestock Information Programme is going to be a key to that. So farmers can get really good data. It'll strengthen the EBVs. We're looking about how EBVs are displayed much more easily, such as they've done in Ireland and so on. And I think this is actually a very exciting programme, and it's doing what individuals cannot do. And that is what AHDB should be doing.
So, cheers, Adam. Thank you. Right. So, Tony, I'm going to come to you after this, but I've decided that Rebecca's been quiet for too long, so I'm going to throw you a question, Rebecca. So, Brian Griffiths has asked about grassland is known to sequester carbon. What work are we doing on behalf of the industry to develop reliable metrics to demonstrate our environmental credentials? So, can you? And he's put the example here of working with Rothenstead. And can you just give a bit of an idea about where that environmental side of things is?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really pertinent question, because environment is obviously a massive focus for us at the moment. And again, that's not working in isolation. So we have an environmental plan that is coming through for the entire of this year. A lot of that main focus is around sequestration and use of grassland, understanding the science behind it, what science exists, what that is telling us as a single point of truth, where we can make efforts for improvement and give really clear guidance on the best things to do on farm within each individual system, and then obviously what messages come out of that on the basis of policy and consumer as well. We are working with partners, and that includes using Rothenstead and various others to kind of harness that science. You don't want to reinvent the wheel and redo that science. There is no point. There is an awful lot of science around sequestration and grassland already there. It's about centralizing that and getting that kind of single point of truth for the whole industry. In terms of measurement of that, you're right, we need to be able to demonstrate it. And what you've got at the moment is various different forms of carbon calculators, which give you various different forms of calculations, obviously. So we are putting a lot of work into a program of activity of carbon auditing on farm, and looking at a tool to sit within those KPIs, which will look at particular KPIs around environment, measure those, which will give us a centralized measurement, which we'll then be able to take the outputs of to see where we're getting progression. And that will then be able to be used back into farm to be able to see kind of how that sequestration is going within your farm and within your system. So there is a huge amount of work on that going in, and that will go across the whole of sequestration in grassland. It is worth noting as well that we will be looking at other elements, because sometimes that total focus on carbon isn't always useful, in that actually, if you're looking at your whole farm planning and looking actually at your cycle of animal and plant together, it's really important to consider all those elements. So we're hoping to be a bit of a linchpin on that environmental piece, to come out with not only what the messaging is around farming and the environment, but also kind of give really clear outputs to on-farm to be able to make those improvements. And the benefit of that, actually, to me, is how interlinked it is. Because we talk about this farm performance versus marketing, but actually it doesn't work that way. Everything is interlinked. If we do the work around the environment, that supports the consumer reputation, and vice versa. And actually that all leads to productivity and profitability as well, because any improvements you can take in your kind of emissions and intakes actually increases profitability. So that environmental work actually increases profitability as well. So I could go on for ages, because it's actually an area that's really, really interesting, and something that we're spending a lot of time focusing on.
Okay, cheers, Rebecca. Thank you. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Tony. I'm just going to bring Tony in as well now, who I think might have a question for us. I hope you're there, Tony. It just takes a few seconds, and you've got to just select your camera and everything to make sure that you're on. But we will hopefully Tony will appear in a second, and then we'll jump onto one or two other questions if not. And if it doesn't work, Tony, and you need to come back in, just request again, and I'll try and pop you back up again if that doesn't work. Just while Tony's answering that, there's a fairly quick question here that I'm going to answer from Ross. For Ross Turner. So Ross has asked us about will you be able to use the words English and British in marketing messages going forward? The simple answer to that, Ross, so what we're talking about here is state aid. So we have there are state aid rules that we were tied to when we were within the EU, that basically meant that we couldn't do that. We couldn't use British and English in our marketing. Now, obviously, the deal has just gone through with the EU, so there's a lot of work been done at the moment to work out exactly where we stand on these sort of things. So I'm not going to be able to give you an actual definitive answer at the moment, but it's something that we're very aware of. And obviously, we would like to be able to use as many of the marketing terms as we possibly can, and makes it easier for us. So we'll be exploring that, but it's just going to be depending on where that falls, because the intention initially was to bring that through into UK legislation. So there's a bit of work done in the background at the moment to work out where we stand on that. But it's something we'll probably be able to update people on as we get a little bit better understanding about where the legal mechanisms lie. So Tony's not appeared. So what I'm going to do, and Brian has Brian who just sorry.
Well, I'll say, go on. There's lots of good questions coming up.
Yeah, there are lots of good questions. I was just saying, so Brian Griffiths has requested as well. So Brian, if you wanted to come back on the question that we just answered for you a minute ago, then you might just pop up on the screen in a second. So accept if you do, and if not, we'll jump onto another question. Unless it's the one that you just want to answer in the meantime, Adam.
Well, I was thinking that there's a question there from Greg Dalton about other countries. Yes, so the Middle East has been a focus for us about 3-4 years ago. We got the export license 3 years ago to various countries out there, but also what we also had to do on top of that was we had to get the halal inspectors here certified to their standards. So we paid for that. We got the halal inspectors here trained by a German company because they were certified by the Middle Eastern countries. So all that is in place. Now, what happens, of course, is you get all that certification work done. You get that market open up. Then exchange rates change, and the exporter says, "I don't want to send lamb there anymore." And that is always the situation. But those doors have been opened. We attend the Gulf Food Fair and so on. Obviously not this year. So we do attend food events out there. We do keep connections going out there. And we've got all the export licenses in place. If a lamb exporter in this country wishes to export, not just the export license, but also the certification in his plant for halal as well, that his inspectors are up to their standards. So that market has been opened up.
Hiya, Brian. How are you doing? You all right?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Thank you for taking my question.
No problem.
I don't wish in any way to deride the efforts to improve productivity and so on, but it's just bear in mind that as individual farmers, we are always constantly doing that of our own accord. But what we cannot do is to gather such information as they are collecting at Rothamsted and to counter the vegans and so on. No individual can do that. So I just wanted to stress that that's what we look to you guys to do, really. And I know you've already mentioned it, Adam, but do what we cannot do. Yeah. But as individual farmers, by and large, you know, a lot of what you were talking about in terms of productivity, that's just life and experience. It's what I've been doing for 40 years, trying to make the best of it. So concentrate on that which we cannot do. If that makes sense. Thank you.
Yes,
it does, absolutely right.
It does, Brian. So let's take, say, some of the information that's, I know, what's that continual discussion you have with your vet? Does this vaccine work? Yeah. Does this vaccine for pneumonia in my calves actually make a difference? Well, we could look at, say, with the medicine hub around the corner, we could look at medicine usage. We've got the slaughter data from across thousands and thousands of cattle. And we could be able to say, actually, do you know what? I don't know the answer to this because we haven't looked at it yet, but in the Livestock Information Service is working. We'll be able to look at people who did vaccinate against people who didn't vaccinate. Say, do you know what? People who vaccinated their cattle hit the target weight 40 days quicker than people who didn't. So here is a value for that vaccine. That's the type of thing we could do that an individual never would be able to do. And yet it would give you the information to say, is this investment worthwhile on my farm? And again, when you look at some of the Irish work, where they say, actually, the variance in, say, in calving ease is actually worth more than the variance in carcass size for that breed. So it's doing that sort of thing that is very difficult to do on an individual farm. I think it's important. And you're quite right, Brian. You know, farming as farmers, we've always tried to improve. But I think it's also, someone's always ahead of you somewhere, and if you can look about how they've achieved it, or a new crop that we want to, for instance, we want to grow lucerne on our farm this year, so we're talking to people who've been growing it for a number of years, so we can learn from them. And there's a lot of information on the AHDB website about lucerne growing as well, because we want to reduce our protein purchase requirements on our farm more. And we've been growing red clover for years, so there's always something I think we could. Farm systems change and circumstances change, and I think we need to apply that library. But again, that's why we're focused on areas that individual farmers cannot do. And we're looking for partners in that, whether it's Rothamsted or whether it's Cranfield or whether it's Sial and so on. So we don't go and spend levy payers' money twice.
Yeah,
I can jump in on the back of that as well, just a little bit, because you mentioned about countering that vegan message, Brian, which again is something that individual farmers cannot do. Well, they can on Twitter, but then it turns into a bit of a pile-on. But actually, I personally don't think it's about necessarily countering that message. Actually, it's about changing the conversation completely, because animals and plants work best as a cycle, and that is the approach that we'll be taking, is changing the conversation to actually what we can do is those environmental improvements you are all making already, is being able to centralize those measurements. And once we have those measurements and those improvements, it allows us to change that story completely. And you will already see that there are some more progressive pieces of the press that is looking about sustainability and about actually how food security and the food systems work better as a farming cycle, and to allow farmers to do what they do best. And we need to push on that open door, use our measurements and our improvements, because we have improved massively, but we've plateaued at the moment. We need to get off that plateau and start kind of moving forward and demonstrate what individuals have been doing to change that conversation entirely, rather than always being on the back foot.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's a really good point, because we talk about this a lot, don't we? About not necessarily needing to engage head to head. It's about actually about having doing it on our own terms, and making sure that we're putting our best foot forward. And that then comes back down to the evidence we were talking about earlier on, doesn't it? And making sure that we're very clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that comes to, and there were a couple of submitted questions about that area as well, and why don't you come back with negative facts about the vegan argument, and actually it's not about that, is it, Rebecca? That's not where you get your traction. It's about how you demonstrate what you're doing.
Yeah, because at the moment, actually, while they're incredibly loud, they're actually very, very small. So I think that they quote 6%. I think you actually find about 0.5% of baskets don't include an animal-based product at the moment. It's quite tiny. And it would be like, and I always use this analogy, it would be like Coca-Cola getting really worried about a little local brand coming out. We are the market leaders, and we are running the show effectively. So going head to head actually isn't helpful, because the most people that you are actually are the waverers, and they're the people listening to the arguments. And what they want is the positivity and the permission, which we can give because we've got a really good story and we work together as a farming cycle, rather than going head to head, which almost plays into their hand, because it's just not something that we need to do. We should be proud of what we're doing, and act as the market leader, which is what we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so we've still got quite a few questions to go through, so we're going to try and fire through a few more. So if we can be short and snappy in our answers, I know we like to go on a bit, but if we just try and, so I'm just going to pick one up myself just now. So one of the pre-submitted questions was from James Fanshawe, who asked about the chairman saying that levy will be aimed at being relevant to 70% of levy payers. Is this the top, middle, or bottom 70%? Now, I think that this is probably something that's got lost slightly in translation, because we want to be relevant to 100% of levy payers. So we'd hope that a lot of the things that we've talked about already tonight and are going to talk about will help all levy payers. So if you're talking about the reputational work, or you're talking about even the trickle through of some of the genetics work, that is going to hopefully be relevant to everybody. What we were talking about when we're talking about the 70% is about engagement. So it's getting 70%, and it's quite a bold target that we want to have 70% of our levy payers using our tools and services by the end of this 5-year strategy. And you know, everybody will probably be well aware at the moment in that the levy that is paid by individual levy payers is paid to us through processors. So actually even being able to get in contact with all our levy payers is a difficulty for us as it stands at the moment. So to have that target of 70% of levy payers using multiple tools and services that we provide as AHDB is a very bold target. So it's not about being relevant, it's making sure that we're engaging properly and people are using our services. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, is this engagement, this understanding, this talking to levy payers, doing things like we're doing tonight and having a two-way conversation is going to be absolutely vital for us as AHDB. We have to get as close to levy payers as we possibly can do and make sure that we are listening and that we're hearing. So that's so I just wanted to just clarify that point. So Adam, I've just seen at the bottom here that, and Ros has just had the question, there've been a couple mentioned about it so far, is about and we had a couple of pre-submitted ones about livestock information and kind of almost where we're up to with that. And Ros makes a point here about we should be focusing on the regulatory side and the statutory side of delivering. Well, Ros has put sheep movements here, but it's animal, it's ruminant movements.
Okay.
As we get, and before we start talking about the added benefits of it. So I guess there's, because I'm sure that most people on here will be aware of livestock information, but that's the statutory service where us, along with DEFRA in partnership, are pulling together the new system that will track animal movements across the UK. I guess that point there, Adam, about where it's up to and this added value and running before you can walk.
Well, I think it's Ross makes a good point, because in what's really okay for those who don't know, BCMS and ARAMs are disappearing, and AHDB, along with working with DEFRA, are developing the new systems to take over. Both probably the sheep one will come first, and then the cattle shortly afterwards. Now, the trouble is, if we leave the added value things until the end, they can't be built within the system to deliver once it goes live, even if it's a short while afterwards. So we're constructing the systems which will be able to take a lot of added value things within it, whether it's about genetics, whether it's about medicines, whether it's about enhanced movements, or whatever you want to do, or things display in the market about, say, for instance, if you're going to a replacement heifer sale, you'll be able to see its BVD status from its farm it's come from, etc., or its genetics and so on, that relates to that animal, or whether it's whole lifetime assurance. If you're buying finishing store cattle, you want to finish, you want to know for your customers. Some customers will say they don't want so many movements, so you want to know how many movements that animals had. You know, there's a nice quick way for markets to be able to display the information such as that, and also for things like whole lifetime assurance, if you wish to do that, and so on, to make it quick and easy. Now, if we wait until after the system has been built, it'll be more expensive to go and put those in afterwards. So we went down the added functionality, added value route right at the beginning, because that's why AHDB became involved, no, we're not really, we didn't set up simply because we wanted to run the legal requirements of a movement scheme. We wanted to be able to use the system, the data, to enhance and give farmers good information to improve their genetics or animal health or their marketing ability, and also to strengthen some of those export markets who want to know more information about how the cattle are produced in this country, because their customers are thousands of miles away and they need to understand it better and easier and give more confidence. So I think actually you can't wait until after you've built the system. You have to do the as many of the added value things within the system as you built it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to move on to just a slightly different subject now. So, and one that that I'll just probably pick up for now. So Jan Ledoux has asked in the chat about what measures are in place to assess the relative effectiveness of spend in each of the strategy areas. So this is a really good question about how we, and the evaluation of what we do and how we perform is again, and I'll probably keep saying this about everything, but is central to where we need to be as an organisation. So we talked about transparency previously and how we were and how we want to be clearer with what our aims are, what our objectives are, and then how we're performing against that. So I talked a little bit about the evidence and data unit at the beginning of this. And one of the core functions of that evidence and data unit is going to be making sure that we are effectively evaluating what work we are doing, about what it's delivering, and then we're able to communicate that back to levy payers. Because I mean this is no secret. We're coming up for a period now where we are going to be, as AHDB, we are going to be looking at a ballot on the organisation every 5 years. So we have to be very, very clear with levy payers about what we are delivering, and about how that value and about what value that's offering back. So this evaluation part of it's going to be absolutely vital. And I think there was another question, I can't remember who asked it in the chat, about what the methodology was, about what work we're supporting and what work we're commissioning. And that's going to have to run through a very, very similar process. In the fact that everything is going to, and I've said, and as I refer back to what I was saying at the beginning, that interaction with levy payers and levy payers leading the work that we're doing is going to become absolutely part of the course, and we will be using that then to set the levy rate appropriately to be able to deliver that in the best way. So whether it's commissioning work, whether it's evaluating what we do, we're going to have a completely transparent process that explains to levy payers exactly why we're doing things and what it is delivering back. So those two questions are, again, it's probably a little bit of the mechanics, but it's going to be really, really important. And as we get through, we get this finalised strategy and we take the feedback and we publish what the final strategy is going to be, and we build the operational measures behind that, that's when we'll be able to come out and say, right, these are our targets and this is what we're hoping to achieve. And then as we move through the strategy, we'll be in a place where we're able to report back regularly about how we're going against that and whether we're doing well or whether we're not.
There's also a comment there from Ian Stevens about benchmarking. Ian, I totally agree with you. Talking amongst yourselves is a recipe for disaster. That's why in the benchmarking, you will see national data on your benchmarking, even if your group's discussing it, but also international benchmarking as well. So you can see how you're doing internationally on, say, farm performance. I think this is really important. You're quite right. If you get into a little bubble and all you think of the world is a bubble and you can't do better than that, I always think sometimes when you see how other people do things from outside your area, outside your bubble, and you suddenly go, gosh, we could do better on that, is always a good. Everyone needs to kick out the backside occasionally about doing things differently. So I agree with you, it's important to have an exemplar about what is possible among the industry. Yeah,
so Tony unfortunately hasn't been able to get on the screen, but he's put his comment in the chat, which I'm definitely going to read out because it's a nice one. So thank you, Tony. He's unable to get on the screen. The point I was going to make was that AIMS, so that's the Association of Independent Meat Suppliers, represents levy paying abattoirs, and they find that the AHDB market intelligence data is invaluable. It helps levy paying members make better business decisions to drive up demand for beef and lamb, and we're finding Eat Balanced a great campaign, and we'll urge every levy payer to use Power in the Pocket, their phone, to support the campaign and use its assets on social media, as social media is where the message has been delivered. Agreed, Tony. And this comes back to something that we touched on earlier on about the fact that at the SAH, we play a part in this, and we play a major part, and on the Eat Balance, but actually it's something that we, as an industry, we're stronger when everybody's involved. So any promotion of in this instance, the Eat Balance campaign or anything that we do is, is much appreciated and helps build that message externally, because the more people who are talking about it, the wider the reach becomes. And I think you make a really interesting point there as well about the market intelligence data. So I've talked quite a bit about evidence and data at the moment and how that underpins. Well, we've already got an absolutely fantastic market intelligence team in there who provide, if you look in the back pages of the Farmers Weekly or Farmers Guardian and all the pricing, we work alongside the abattoirs and with the processors to make sure that we are delivering. I meant the markets as well, to make sure we deliver the right the in-time information for people. So there's a huge amount that goes on across the not just from on farm, but also from consumers and that side of things. So that's something that we'll be looking to make sure that we are taking to its absolute max, and that falls into the data piece I was talking about earlier on. So so thank you very much for that comment, Tony. There's a question here from Richard Vines, and Rebecca, maybe you can pick this one. How are you trying to work with major retailers to encourage them to be more on board with promotion of beef and lamb and reducing the reliance on imports?
So that is really important, and actually links back nicely to what I was going to pick up something on Tony and an earlier question about shorter supply chains. We work really closely with the major retailers. So we have a trade team in place who have good relationships with both the agriculture managers and the buyers at major retail, and work with our processors to make sure that we are going in with them to talk to the retailers at all times. And part of the because the Eat Balance campaign is just the pictures on the front, not to devalue it, it's amazing, but it's the pictures on the front of all the knowledge that's behind it. And actually all the knowledge that's behind it about the sustainability, about the story that we've got to tell, about the supply chains that we've got, is what actually drives those retail and processor conversations. And those conversations are all about pushing on the fact that in terms of reputationally and what it has to offer, in terms of taste and enjoyment, consistency, all of that, for beef and lamb is something that retail would be picking up on. So we do work incredibly closely with them to do that piece of work. We also do work, which is good timing with Tony, very closely with AIMS on more of the independent sector and the catering piece. And we are planning through this year how exactly we work on those areas, because both of those are equally important. Food service, when we are actually allowed to go out again, is hugely important to drive things. And you can drive the message really well through food service about Britishness, about people trying new things, and then that will drive into retail. So it's all part of that same circle. And one of the questions as well was about more direct selling. That is also a part of the repertoire of what we do alongside that retail and that smaller independent. We do have information and support on things like bot schemes and how farmers can start to sell direct from Scott Farm Gate and set up those different supply chains. So all of those different elements are areas that our trade team and our market development team focus on, and they use the information out of the market intelligence work and the farm performance work to drive those.
Okay, right.
Just mention that I think as I said, the caterers are extremely important, as we've seen as we saw at the beginning of the COVID crisis. And so we work closely with something like the quality standard mark has been a really useful tool for independent caterers to use on contracts to understand eating quality, and we monitor that as well. So there's a lot of ongoing work there that helps that independent sector into the service sector. So it's not ignored by any means. And again, we've appointed 3-4 years ago someone to handle the whole halal issue, because halal in the sheep market is really important for us. It underpins the sheep industry as much as export does. And so therefore, that's why we're always improving they're mostly independent abattoirs who run the halal markets. And that's why the whole time we're improving our relationship with them, especially around certain festivals such as Kobani and so on, to make sure that the standards are good and everything appropriate is done correctly, that doesn't damage the whole sheep industry through any bad reputational work there. So there's a lot of work going on with that independent sector and also into the service sector and into certain markets. And I'd just like someone who said, talking about exports and should we chase exports, forget about the domestic market here. I think we mustn't forget that the UK has the highest domestic farm gate price on cattle in the world. And I think that's really quite important. It also makes us a honeypot for other people to bring their beef supplies here. And so post-Brexit, that's going to be a real issue. And again, but people say, should we go further wide in the markets for our sheep meat? The fact remains that we spend about £2.5 million a year promoting beef and lamb in Europe. Europe will still remain, now we've got the deal, will still remain one of our major markets, and it's right on our doorstep. It's supply chains we know well, and it's also pays some of the best prices in the world. So I'm really pleased we got the deal. There will be costs on exporting lamb and beef. And again, it comes back to, how do we measure things? Well, we've done lots of campaigns in the past on steak cuts and so on, as Will says. That might have uplifted, we might have spent £1 million. I mean, it might have uplifted that market by £8 million. But the fact is, by moving to the reputational campaign, the reputational work, we're talking about a £2 billion market that we're trying to protect. And that will protect, to have far better return, whether we're in Cornwall or whether we're up in Yorkshire, will return your future markets. And of course, if people aren't keen on buying beef or sheep because they're worried about the environment or about welfare, that's a far bigger benefit to the industry than, say, promoting a particular product on a certain time of the week to eat, etc., like we used to do in the past.
People, actually, the one question that James Fanshawe put up on there, which links into that, UK consumers not paying a proper price and why focus on them. Actually, one of the benefits I would have is, in terms of the data, that messaging we have around Britishness actually means that the majority of our product goes into premium, and a lot of that commoditized product is our imports. So the British produced product goes into those premium ends, and we can protect those areas.
Okay, so we're running out of time now. We've covered an awful lot of ground. We've had one or two challenging questions now, and we had one that was submitted to us beforehand. And I hope we've covered quite a lot of this off tonight, but I just want to acknowledge it really, and just try and show that we're not trying to kind of shy away from it. So we had a question submitted beforehand, which is: AHDB is ambitiously recruiting for well-paid roles for the promotion of beef from Britain to restaurants in Belgium and other countries. This benefits beef processors in the UK whose beef can come from anywhere and consequently pass no benefit to British farmer. As a levy payer, I would like to know what AHDB is doing for the farm gate prices in Britain for levy-paying beef farmers such as ours in Cornwall. So this is from Ian Stevens. Also, please explain how these roles directly benefit me, as I directly pay the levy. Please don't allude to indirect benefits that are meaningless and just for a convenience. So I just wanted to read it out because we have several sort of challenging questions, and the very fair challenges. And Ian, I've seen that you're on the chat today, so I would hope that we've answered some of those questions about how we would drive some direct benefit back to you. If you want to put anything in the chat or whatever, if you feel we have or we haven't answered that question, I'd be interested to know, because I'd be also interested to know if there's any more that people want to be drawn out. And one thing I will say about what we're doing tonight and what we're hopefully going to carry on doing over this next period, I mean, we're really aiming at the moment to get as many people involved with the strategy as we can. And the consultation on the strategy shuts at the end of this month. So it's the 29th of January, the last day for feedback on the strategy. That doesn't mean we stop there and we'll carry on doing. But over this next period of time, if anybody on this call, and I'm just going to put a slide back up on the screen now, if anybody who is on the call now wants to have any further conversation individually, or wants me or Rebecca or Adam to come and talk at a group, at an NSA meeting, a committee meeting, whatever it might be, then please give us a shout, no matter how big or small, because we want to have these conversations. We want to make sure everybody feels that they've had their questions answered or any specifics. So what we'll try and do, and there are one or two, and I hope we've covered most of the flavour off of the pre-submitted questions, because there are a lot that were very similar. So I'm hoping we've got most of the things out of the way for those. And there's also quite a bit come out in the chat as well down the right hand side. So anything that we've not covered off today or we feel needs a follow up, we will follow up on, and we'll make sure that we release and probably about the time when we get the recording up. So we will pick that up. The one question, the one plea that I have for everybody who's out here on the call tonight is we'd like feedback, and I mentioned it at the beginning, but this is a genuine consultation period. We want to hear what your opinions are. We want to hear whether what we've put so far is right. Is it wrong? Are there things that we could do differently? So there are one or two different ways you can feedback. If you go onto and then David's put in the chat down the left hand side the links. So you can go on to ahdb.org.uk/strategy feedback, and that takes you through to a questionnaire. It's quite a simple questionnaire. There are about 6 or 7 questions on there. It doesn't take ages to do, but there's also a free text box at the end. So it's quite intuitive. You click on and you say that you're after the beef and lamb sector, and it throws you straight through to those questions. And it will just ask you how you view the strategy. And you can base it on what you've heard here tonight. So if we could get as many people to go along to that and do that feedback as we possibly can do, it will give us a real good readout. One of the challenges with this digital way of doing things is that I find that I'm talking to myself a lot in here, so you can't read the room like you will be able to in a real town hall, and you can't have the conversations that you normally have afterwards and start to.
Yeah. You can't go for a beer and talk more detail about some of these questions. There's some really good questions here, and Rebecca and I were talking about how do we keep this communication going, because this strategy, even on the end of this month, is not over. It's always going to be developed. It's always going to be fine-tuned. And I think personally, Rebecca and I were talking about, every 6 months we'd like to do something like this, so you know what we're doing, what we're up to as an organisation, and each of those discussions will have a focus in a particular area, whether it's exports, whether it's domestic, and so on. Because I think it's really important. This is your organisation. Well, actually, it won't be me or with Rebecca, because there'll be a role. My role's being advertised fairly soon, so I'm coming to the end of my term. So I think it's important that we keep this communication going. These are the types of events we would have done, driving around the country, seeing people at shows and so on. But we need to do more of this online meeting so you can put your views on, because there's some really good questions there tonight that we haven't fully addressed. We've only sort of passed, and actually some of those questions are a whole meeting in themselves in some ways. So it'd be great if we can carry on doing these so we can understand what you want out on farm that makes a benefit to you, but also you can understand the work we're doing better as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So so feel free to get in touch if anybody wants that. And as Adam says, this engagement part is going to be vital. The other way you can do it is you can just email. You can email the strategy 2021 at ahdb.org.uk. And David Barton has just come in with a question at the end, and I think I may have just not quite got to one of yours earlier, David, is, will you answer all the questions after this event is finished? Yes, we will. We'll come back with answers for anything that we have down the right-hand side. We will come back down and we'll get answers for. So yes, we will do, David. So I really want to say thank you. Well, first of all, thank you to Adam and to Rebecca for coming along and answering the questions tonight. But more importantly, not that neither of you are important, of course, but I really want to thank everybody who has come along and given their evening up to listen to us talk tonight. It's really important from our point of view, and thank you very much for taking your time. And we'll talk to you all over this next period. So thank you very much indeed.